Buckle up, Camp Pros, and get ready to launch into the future of summer camp with Camp Ahead. Camp Ahead helps Camp Pros think about the future so they're not caught off guard. Climate mitigation, heat, gender, war, demographics, economics, artificial intelligence. Are we ready as an industry? Camp Ahead, exploring the futurology of the summer camp industry. You can find our contact information and the many show notes from each episode at gocamp.pro/campahead.
Is creating your camp schedule a headache? Does it limit the experience of campers or staff? Campify is the software that does the heavy lifting for you, taking care of group, elective, and specialist scheduling based on your custom scheduling rules. Interested in learning more? Visit campify.io/campahead to schedule a demo or create a free trial today.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to episode 8 of the Camp Ahead podcast. This is the final episode of season number 1, and we are super excited that you have either been with us for the journey or have downloaded this one. Let me introduce myself. My name's Joe Richards. I'm the executive director at Pierce Williams, which is a summer camp and retreat facility in southwestern Ontario, and is part of the United Church of Canada's camping network. And we're located sort of halfway between Detroit and Toronto. KJ, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is KJ Williams. I am the camp director and chief program officer at Bantam Lake YMCA Camp in Mugwanago, Wisconsin.
Hey there. I'm Jess Roberts. I'm the executive director of Episcopal Camps and Conference Centers, which is a association organization of about 100 Episcopal camp, conference, and retreat centers across mostly the United States, some in Europe, and some in South America.
That's awesome. Just a quick reminder, we have 8 episodes. We've talked about everything from introducing foresight and scenario planning to identifying drivers and uncertainties to developing scenarios, analyzing the implications of scenarios, early warning signs and strategic planning. We've also talked about creating actionable plans and contingency strategies and reviewing, updating, and engaging others in scenario planning. A reminder that this season has been based off the book Imaginable by Jane McGonigal, which talks about imagining a future. So, and scenario planning is one of those ways that we believe that camp can make itself ready as an industry for future disruptions that we have yet to see or to understand. Had we been aware in 2010 of, doing a pandemic scenario, we might have been in a very different place in 2020 when it actually happened. We'd be like, oh, yeah, these are some of the things we can do and move forward. On episode 8, we just want to do a wrap up and give you some takeaways. And we have a little prize at the end if you stay with us and you've joined us for this long. So feel free to listen. I've never done a hook like that. Ooh, there's a hook. Yeah. What are some of the things you would like, thoughts on the season and thoughts on, as we wrap this up, what's one of the most important things you think people need to think about and be aware of as they move forward with scenario planning and futures thinking in their organization?
I think there's a benefit when we're talking about future planning. We were just talking about this before we started recording our podcast today. But there is such a benefit in long-term scenario planning. Like Joe had just said, if we were planning for a potential pandemic in 2010, it would have been a different world in 2020 on our camps. A lot of us get stuck in the motion of planning for next week or next month or this summer. And there's benefits to that as well, of course, but planning further out, I think that is a big key takeaway for me as I've gone through these, 7 podcasts we've been doing together, is how can I plan out for an ultimate amount of scenarios 10 years down the line from now.
And I would encourage you to use the term imagining versus planning 10 years out, right? Because it's hard to plan anything 10 years out, but you can imagine different things 10 years out, and then you can start putting some plans in place as you move towards them.
I think for me, I kind of made a little bit of a list of tips and tricks, right? Just to remember. And I think if you're just getting into future scenario planning, it's okay to start small. Like we talked about in the last episode, talk about truths about your camp, right? Name some facts about your camp. And then kind of what does the opposite look like? Just start small, imagine small. Use storytelling, narrative. With storytelling, you can make future scenarios more tangible and it's easier to communicate. Set regular check-ins. Review your scenarios, talk with other people about them. Don't just work on it and then put it away. That's not how it works. Next, monitor trends. Follow industry news, not just in your community, but global trends. And sometimes you can see those signals, those things that happen that you're like, ooh, I need to remember this. Be adaptable. Be adaptable. Be flexible. You have to in this world, in this work, you have to be able to be flexible when you're decision making, when you're training, when you're doing staff development. Because if you aren't, you're missing something. And I like this idea of embracing optimism, because I think over the past couple of episodes, we were planning, these a lot of negative things or scary things. And KJ'd be like, well, let's look at the positive, right? So future planning, future imagining isn't about fear. I think it's about hope, and it's about empowering us to shape what comes next. And so if we kind of change our mindset on what future scenario planning is, future scenario imagining, it isn't scary. And you're not alone in it.
And that's huge. It's one of those things I recently read in a new book that I've started. The quote that I sent to some friends, somebody had said that when we were young, so for me, being young is like the late 80s, early 90s, like there was just so much hope and optimism. The quote in this book is, "Fear will be part of the future. Being afraid, however, will be optional. Courage will be required." Right? The idea that you can look towards something that seems fearful at this moment, but the more you look at it and the more you sort of imagine a future of you in it and how you would adapt to it, that's where optimism, and you don't need to be afraid of it. You can just, you're like, oh, I've thought through this and go with it.
Can you say that quote one more time?
I can. It's from the book Leaders Make the Future, 3rd edition, 10 New Skills to Humanize Leadership with Generative AI. Fear will be part of the future. Being afraid, however, will be optional. Courage will be required. It's a powerful quote for anybody. And it's one of those things, as we move through the idea of scenario planning, and I think that what I would encourage anybody who wants to take this on for their own camp is you can reach out to us, but also this idea that there are very gentle ways, as Jess was saying, to start this, which is this idea that the book actually walks you through a bunch of ways, instead of jumping right into a scenario, to like get your mind thinking through things. So 100 things that are true today and how they're not true. How can you make them untrue? Stakeholders mapping, there's a bunch of things you can do before getting into a big scenario activity.
So you said you texted your friends that quote.
Texted is a strong word. I was on Facebook.
It's just so weird. I didn't get that quote from you.
Me neither.
So the full story is that in high school, when I was in high school, I was part of the Provincial Students' Council for all of Ontario. And so there were only 13 of us for a province of, 20 million people. And that group, as we know through camp, as the three of us know through camp, those are the formative years, right? Like when you're 18, anywhere from 16 to 22. So high school and university or college, a lot of things form. The 13 of us who sat on that provincial sort of students council and got together 3 to 5 to 7 times over the course of a year, we really formed a sort of a friendship that was very camp-like. And we attended leadership conferences that were very camp-like. And it was a time, because I think and I wonder when that changed. That's an interesting point. When I was 18 or 19, there was a bunch of optimism in the world. There was also, or that's how I remember it. There was also the Iraq War going on, the first Iraq War going on. There was also other threats of nuclear stuff being used. So none of that is, although it appears new to people who never lived through it. My friend Dell sent me a message, sent the group a message, because we had gotten together during the COVID to talk about our own experiences as this group of 13 people. And we had like 9 of the 13 on the call during COVID, and we talked it's great to talk through friends. And he had sent a message talking about optimism and how much he appreciates all of us still, and that he still carries that with him 25 or 30 years later. And then that quote came to mind, and that's who I sent it to, was that group chat. You're not part of that group chat, Jess, so not yet, maybe later.
Joe, I really only said that for comedic.
Oh yeah, well,
you didn't, but I appreciate you sharing that story.
Okay, we'll do a pause now and just delete that point out. No, I think that the other thing I would say is that, did you talk about it being a habit in your chat a little bit, Jess? I was on a phone call, so I didn't. The idea
I did not say habit. I did say regular check-ins. Like, it's important to not just do it and then put it away.
It's not a report in a binder that sits on a shelf, right? It's not, because that reference might get old or is old, right? But the idea that you need to create it as something you do continuously. You revisit, you do different ones. Maybe you have a scenario club in which you do a different scenario every year with your camp and your stakeholders. What that does is it will give not only you, as, let's say, whatever your role is at camp, but all of these scenarios tend to give me, when I think through them, a different perspective on things that I then sort of carry with me going forward. So making it a habit to think about the future and to think about it in an optimism viewpoint, because I'm sure for millennials, it can seem like the world isn't very optimistic at times.
Right. And bringing in and utilizing different voices. I think we've talked about too on this podcast, utilizing folks on every level at your camp and having them be a part of the conversation. I think that brings in a lot of diversity when we're having these conversations about future scenarios.
Yeah, for sure. The stakeholders, and I did work last night with my board on stakeholders, getting those stakeholders, and sometimes you don't even know who they are until you have a group of people talking through who the stakeholders are. And last night we're like, okay, well, regulatory bodies are stakeholders in a way, right? So our health unit or our building inspector, who I was on the phone with just a few minutes ago, and they have a high influence on us because they influence Pierce Williams, but they have a low interest in what Pierce Williams does. Their high influence is that and so stakeholders, you have like high influence, high interest, low interest, high influence, right? Like you have a 2x2 grid with those things in it. It was interesting to go through and see, okay, well, who's low, right? Who's low interest, low influence? Do we need to move some of those people? Like our founding churches, we actually put as low right now because of some changes that have happened within our church structure. We put our indigenous community currently down in low because we don't have a relationship with them and we need to build that. So it's interesting with stakeholders, and super, super important that you just don't do this with the full-time staff at camp.
Yeah, and you never know where folks are going to end up when we're talking about, 10 years out and imagining 10 years out, your staff now or your seasonal team now or your first-time parents now, 10 years out could be some of those massive stakeholders, right? Could be your greatest asset on your alumni community, could be your biggest recruiting and marketing tool. And so building those relationships early with this idea of imagining out 10 years from now where these people could be in terms of your camp community is huge.
And not only that, KJ, for you specifically, for someone who's younger and or for my camp director who's like 22, thinking about the future now will prepare them for future career moves as well.
Totally.
Because when they get somewhere new, it's not like any of the scenario planning is only limited to your site. All of the lessons you take from imagining a different future can be applied to any site you show up at. And that's, I think, is that's huge. And I think one of the reasons that I would love to see this as something that is offered to young camp professionals, because I think it would also make them less anxious about the future, right? More in the terms of that they know that whatever comes, they can think through, or they will have thought of something.
Mm-hmm.
I think also you have new camp professionals, and you also have the camp folks who've been there forever, the veterans who are like, it has to be done this way. And to be able to pause and have to think differently is a great challenge and opportunity to learn. And the other piece that I want to stress that we haven't really talked about yet with imagining is go big. Go big, go big when you're imagining, right? Be as wild as you want and creative as you want, because you never know what else is out there when you start thinking and dreaming bigger.
Be ridiculous at first. It is part of the book. That's one of the chapters, right? Like, just
Yeah.
be ridiculous. And I think that I love that idea. Just think bigger. Think about the best thing you think could ever happen to your camp, and then think better, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah.
that's where I want to remind people that early in our podcast, right, KJ, you were the voice that always pulled Jess and I back to positive thinking, not just
Mhm.
negative scenarios. And I think that it's easy, especially in the current environment that we find ourselves in North America, to think in a negative scenario. But 10 years from now, you have no idea what it's going to be like. So you can imagine anything and imagine and go from there. Because what scenario planning is imagining a possible future. Do I want to go there? No. Well, how do I prevent us from going there? Or sort of want to head towards this thing. Okay, what actions can we take now to sort of move towards it?
Mhm.
Yeah, I think there's a fine line between imagining a scenario and spiraling into the abyss,
Yeah.
right?
Or I was just even thinking about people who are like, gosh, we have so much deferred maintenance. We're not going to raise enough money. We can't do it. And if you put your brain there, well, no, of course you're not going to do it.
Mm.
If that's your mindset. But what if you spent time saying, okay, 10 years from now, we have finished a capital campaign for $1.5 million. Start there. Stop with the no and try the yes and build from there and get creative and then make steps towards that, right? So, but you have to be willing to be a little uncomfortable thinking and planning and things will, I think that's why the collaboration is so important too, is that when you're dreaming and imagining with people, do it together.
Summer camp directors, listen up. What if I told you there was a magical tool that could transform your camp scheduling chaos into a breeze? Introducing Campify, a camp scheduling platform making scheduling as fun as camp itself. Before you hit skip, hear us out. Campify isn't just another app, it's your new secret weapon to conquer scheduling chaos. Camps across North America wish they tried it sooner, and none would ever go back to scheduling the old-fashioned way. Every camp is unique, and it has its own special quirks. Campify gets that, and it works and thinks for you. It builds schedules based on rules that you set, and Campify offers much more than group scheduling. Campify's elective module gives campers personalized schedules. Say goodbye to last-minute changes causing scrambling and confusion. Campify's staff mobile app updates schedules in real time. Your time is valuable. Let Campify save you hours and make the scheduling effortless. Bring your camp into the future and discover the smarter way to schedule. Visit campify.io/campahead to schedule a demo. Create a free trial and claim 10% off your first year's license.
And one of the things that brought up a point that I don't actually think I've mentioned on this podcast, but you two can remind me if I have in my old senile ages. When I was a young programmer and a very young camp director, I realized there's two kinds of programmers in the world. One of the programmer goes into the program shed, looks at all of the equipment and says, what can we do with this? And the second kind of programmer sits under a tree and imagines this amazing program and then comes into the program and says, how can we make this happen?
Mhm.
Right. And those seem like a similar person, but they're not at all. The example, because if I wanted to hold an elven feast in the middle of the forest for our board members' dinner,
like we all
how,
do.
like you do at camp, how do you make that happen? And if your thing is, oh, I'm going to hold an elven feast like in Mirkwood, where the feast moves place to place. Okay, that's a bit more difficult, but I want it to be like this magical thing. And I think that people can limit themselves by looking at, as Jess was saying, at their deferred capital. Well, if all of this is still true 10 years from now, well, what if all of that is not true? What if you've solved all of those things? What is the next step? How can we make these things possible? And I think that's the big imagination, right? Is to say, instead of this is what we have, what can we do? To say, this is what we want to do, and how do we make it come true?
Mm.
And in the end, that might be the whole key to scenario planning. Don't know.
You said something a couple weeks ago, Joe, that I've used as a young camp director that I'm planning on using this summer. Is you said, I tell my staff, yes, right? Yes, and, or yes, but, or yes, we'll get around it. Whatever they come to you, learning how to say yes. And I love that mindset in just the day-to-day camp world, but also in this scenario planning is, oh, we're going to have this dinner in the forest, board dinner. What did you call it?
Elven feast.
Elven feast.
Excuse me. This elven feast in the forest, right? In our land. And in my brain, I'm like, well, we could just do a regular nice dinner. And then I go, yeah, let's have the feast, and here's how we're gonna do it. And we're gonna maybe sit on the ground instead of moving chairs, or we're gonna whatever it is. And using that mindset of yes and or yes, but I think is such a great starting point when we're talking about this.
And yet again, I think I've said this in so many episodes.
Come on, improv.
Improv leadership training is so important.
Yeah.
For soft skills, for community work, for leadership. And it
For
really
scenario planning.
It really trains you to stop saying no.
Yeah.
Because when you say no, everything that you have built up, trust, everything that you've worked on has to start over. And the cool thing is that in improv, you can see change happen in a split second. Whereas some change we don't see happen for decades, but you can see that change can happen in a split second. And so you go, change is possible. And that is hope, especially for folks who have a really, really hard time with change. But what if instead of saying no, you said yes, and you sat down together and started talking and collaborating and listening?
And the buy-in from that, the buy-in and the investment that you're going to get from everybody who's a part of that. Yes. Oh my gosh, my staff or college staff that are here for 2-3 summers, when they're part of that buy-in for the yes 10-year project, we might get them for 4 or 5 summers, which is a big deal. So I think that investment is huge around the yes.
And the younger you start people thinking through this, the easier it becomes for them to shape out their own future of saying yes and seeing things, right? I don't think I came to the program analogy by myself. I think because I was taught by people when I was a young camp staff to not be limited by the equipment that camp didn't have. When you grow up at a camp that is equipment poor, you just have to make the world special with what you have.
And it makes you as a leader, I think, a better leader, because you are getting so much feedback from everyone and not just the people at the top. You are inviting everyone to the table to be a part of this imagining and this future planning together. And I think it makes you a better leader. It has better buy-in from everyone, and your staff turnover rate. I mean, there's so many things that are like a domino effect when you bring everyone to the table.
Yeah.
It's huge because we all want our camps to be around, not just next year, not just 5 years or 10 years from now. We want our camps to be around for today's Campers Camper, that 27-year mark. We want our camps to be around I want our camp to be around for our 105th anniversary, so I can show up as a 94-year-old and give the same talk that my 94-year-old director from the 70s gave in September, because that would be awesome. One of the things for people who are still listening is that the book itself, Imaginable, is worth the purchase. It's worth the purchase. It's worth the read. In fact, at near the end, she has a whole chapter on how to design and run your own scenarios for your own organization. My plan is that over the course of the next few months, I actually create a scenario club for camp people, and then we encourage people to come and actually work through some scenarios with us before we get into hopefully a season 2 next fall at some point. But like, those are the things I don't want people to forget, that you don't need you can re-listen to this podcast as much as you want. The book is also super awesome.
Mhm. And I've got 2 sort of template worksheets. One is a beginner's, like I don't know how to do future scenario planning, and it's a little bit daunting. I've got a worksheet, and then I've got one that kind of can help you. And so if you want those, send me an email and I will send them to you.
Do you want to put them in the show notes?
I want them to email me.
Okay. We'll put that in the show notes. Email this address for the sheets. That'd be great.
For the sheets.
For the
Yeah.
sheets. For the sheets. Yeah. I love so much that you two joined, that we did this podcast. I'm not wrapping, I don't know that we're wrapping up the recording right now, but I just want to say that this idea of futures scenario planning has been on my mind for a number of years. And my belief is that our industry can only survive if we look ahead and are ready for things that we can't see coming. And scenario planning isn't about, once again, predicting the future. It's about imagining possible futures so that when the true future comes, we are more ready and able to adapt to it. And so I'm just super excited that that this has actually come to something after a number of years.
It's fun to talk with other people who have been doing this or been thinking about it in any aspect. Sometimes and this often happens in the camp world, you are sort of isolated and you sometimes feel like, oh, I'm the only one that's doing XYZ. And it's really fun to talk with other people who have been thinking about this. And it just makes me think, what else is out there for us to be talking about and collaborating? How can we break down these silos so that we're resource sharing and working together to bring that camp experience to more people?
Yeah, the goal in my mind, over a decade ago, I was touring Australian outdoor ed centers and had dinner with a YMCA guy who supervised the state of Victoria's YMCA camps. And he essentially was saying that he offered support not only to his 5 sites, but to any summer camp in the state of Victoria who reached out, whether they were Y or not. And it was this long conversation about his reasoning for that is that because we need to make all camps better, period, full stop. Competition is one way that people look at summer camp, but the other way is that if your camp sucks, then parents are going to think that all camp sucks if they come home. And that's where I think that by promoting the idea of scenario planning and thinking for the future, my goal is to give people more longevity in camping, because we do have a dearth, what a great word, a dearth of people who start young and then burn out. But also to have them ready for the various things that are going to hit them along the way, and just make them more resilient to the small things as they've looked to a future that they want to aim towards. Yeah. Interesting. I do have one question before we fully wrap up. At the ECCC conference in February, I ran a session that Jess and I had planned. And one of the comments from one of the participants was he didn't understand, when you give a scenario, he didn't understand where we want him to start from. He wasn't sure if he was starting from today and planning towards getting to that, or if the scenario is, because he's like, this couldn't come true. And I was like, well, no, just imagine that it is. He's like, well, these are the reason that what. Do you think that I don't know how to better prepare people to imagine a future and I don't know how to tell them, okay, this is where you start from. Because I think that's one of the keys in scenario planning is we need to think through how do we give them the instruction on how to start that thinking?
First, I think you need to be okay to play pretend for a minute. I think the older we get, the harder it is to play, and we should never forget that side of us. But this is an exercise to remember. This is an exercise. So, if our situation is, 15 years from now, it rains frogs. It doesn't, for this purpose, like, let's not worry about how the frogs got there. Like, let's just look at, okay, this is the situation and it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have to we imagine, right? We have to expand, we have to be creative, and we have to just say, okay. And that can be really hard sometimes.
You just said this to me 10 minutes ago, Joe, we're not planning yet, we're just imagining. So the imagining, I think, can be challenging, but planning for raining frogs seems a lot harder than just imagining frogs raining down from the sky. So we are just imagining first and imagining all of the possibilities and then potentially looking into planning. But that is secondary, if not further down the list below the imagining part.
Yeah.
And I also know with that, though, that for some people, like I think about my 9-year-old daughter, she takes everything literally. I mean, if we're walking down the sidewalk and I say we need to move over a little bit because there's people coming, she will like go all the way off of the sidewalk. She's like, you told me to get off the sidewalk. And so I think we have to get creative in the ways that we think about what imagining means, especially if we want this to be accessible to all different types of learners and leaders. And so sometimes giving examples of what that looks like is helpful. That's the teacher in me kind of coming out a little bit.
Yeah. I look back and wonder if I worded those scenarios incorrectly, right? Like to start. Because I think back to the Zerotopia, which was a garbage scenario I did with the Urgent Optimist group. And it's essentially saying, hey, today is day one of your no garbage. And how does this affect how has this, how do you move forward in time with this? And I think that was one of the keys, is just the way it's worded. So when we're creating scenarios, we want to be careful to say, we're not worried about how that scenario came to be. We don't care how frogs started to rain from the sky. What we're saying is, hey, from this point forward, how do we deal with this? Right? Like, because if you were to do a pandemic scenario, people are like, well, what didn't we do in the past 10 years that caused this? No, that's not where we're imagining. We're imagining how you're going to react in the moment to this thing and go forward and plan or imagine a possible future with this scenario in place.
I wonder, now that I'm hearing it, if the question is, are we being, let's just use transferring universes and being plopped into a world where it's raining frogs and we have to figure it out? Or are we saying we know 10 years from now, something's going to happen where frogs are going to rain from the sky? And maybe that was the question of like, am I being dropped right into the situation, or am I imagining, like, I have foresight to know this is in this made up world that it's going to happen in 10 years? Maybe that was his question.
Yeah, I think scenarios are better when you plot them into them, and then it's a how you react to it versus we know this is going to happen in 10 years. Yeah, that whole session was the first time I'd led a session on futures thinking, and cause me, and Jess and I had this very brief talk, like I would change the entire thing. I was like, oh, this is not the entire, I would change the entire layout to make sure that it was better. We got their creativity flowing faster. And so that was part of it.
Well, and improv would teach you that actually everything that needed to happen happened that way, and that you take what you have from there that affects the way that you do it next. You learn from it and you build from there.
Yeah.
I will say that I did get feedback that it was a really, really well done. Not that that's why you were asked, but I will say there was good feedback on it.
But I think in any scenario, like anytime you lead an activity or anytime we do a podcast like this, so this is the first of its kind for the camping world to think about futures and scenarios so deeply as we have over 8 episodes. I think that we all, as you say, and it's happened the way it's supposed to happen. And now what we take away and how we move forward is super important. And that's where a session like that, I want to make sure this message becomes accessible to people in our industry. And I love the idea of templates that you've done up, Jess. Those are, and you can email Jess directly for those. That'll be in the show notes. And yeah. Any final thoughts on season 1 of Camp Ahead?
I mean, I think we hit everything: being optimistic, being creative, thinking big, involving people in the conversation, constantly be willing to be flexible and adaptable. Keeping all of that in mind as we move through these scenarios together, or with your group, or with people that you're having these conversations with. And also bringing new people into the conversation. It doesn't even have to be camp people. Someone from outside of the camp world might have some foresight or some insight that you didn't even think of. And being willing to be adaptable and flexible when having these conversations, I think, is huge.
I think I said this in the first episode, but keep your mission as your guiding star, your North Star in what you do.
Thank you for that. One of the things we have, if you're still listening and you've listened to the podcast, for the first 5 people to send, whose email are we, to me, send to me.
Sure.
So the first 5 people to reach out to me, you'll get a custom ECCC pin from Jess. You will get a t-shirt from Phantom Lake and KJ. And you will get one custom name tag made, hand cut by me, and we will get those to you in some way, shape, or fashion. What you're going to do is email us a few short words about the podcast and what you liked about it or what you didn't like about it. And you're going to send that to Joe, Joe at campisbetter.com, Joe at campisbetter.com. And that's the first 5 people to do it. Yeah.
I think they have to call your personal cell, Joe.
Well, they can, I don't want to confuse them. If you've listened to the episode and found my personal cell and another one, feel free. Nobody has called me yet. I've put it out on numerous podcasts over the years. And do you think it's just a fear thing, or people just don't reach out?
Yes.
Yeah. Good answer.
Fear is part of the future. Being afraid is optional.
If you want a future scenario exploration sheet or sort of a template in dipping your toe into future scenario planning, email me at jess@episcopalccc.org and I will send that to you.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
And I am currently, fun news, I'm currently working with a group of some young camp professionals in our 20s, in our first 5 years or so of being full-time camp professionals, to just create a collaborative group of individuals that talk to each other, that are on the same level, that can vent to each other, that can talk about camp problems together. And we're coming up with concepts of a plan to meet monthly. So that is coming out soon. If you want more information about that or about anything to do with my camp, you can find me at kj@phantomlakeymca.org or on any of the social media platforms at Phantom Lake YMCA.
That's awesome. You can find out anything you want about Pierce Williams at campisbetter.com. And if I would tell you, I'm actually on Blue Sky now, personally, and I don't know my handle. Who knows these things? If you could find me and direct message me on Blue Sky, you also get a prize.
I'm going to find you.
You can email him. You can Blue Sky him.
I'm also on Blue Sky. I just found myself.
Awesome. That's great. Jess, people can reach out to you at the email you gave?
They sure can.
That's great. This is it for the end of season 1. Unless there's a bonus episode, maybe, who knows? We are super excited that you've listened this far, and we're super excited to potentially do a season 2. Let us know if you have thoughts and comments, and we'll go from there. Bye, everybody.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Camp Ahead, exploring the futurology of the summer camp industry. Don't forget to check out our contact information and show notes at gocamp.pro/campahead. Camp Ahead is part of the Go Camp Pro podcast network. Find a podcast for camp pros of every age and stage at gocamp.pro/podcast. Hey Camp Pros, we love that our industry is built on sharing. In order to foster that spirit, we ask that whenever you get something great from a conference session, one of these podcasts, from the Camp Pros group on Facebook, wherever else, that you give credit where credit is due. That way, people can feel comfortable about sharing their best practices and continue to make all of our camps better. Thanks so much.